All right, let's talk about something that affects every single one of us. Why does the money in your wallet seem to buy a little less every single year? We're going to get to the bottom of it. You know the feeling, right? That $100 bill just doesn't go as far as it used to. So is it just that stuff gets more expensive, or is something else, something fundamental, happening to the money itself? Well, I can tell you it's not just a feeling, it's a real economic process, and we're about to unpack it. The main answer to our question lies in this really powerful idea called the quantity theory of money. Now, at its core, it's actually pretty simple. The more money there is floating around in an economy, the less each individual dollar is worth. And, when money is worth less, you need more of it to buy the exact same things. So if you double the amount of money, the theory predicts that, eventually, you're going to double the prices.
Think about it like you would any other market. That vertical line there, the money supply, that's pretty much set by a central bank. But money demand, that slopes downward. Why? Well, because when money is more valuable, when it can buy more stuff, we just don't need to hold as much of it. The sweet spot where those two lines cross, that's what sets the value of our money and the overall price level for everything.
Okay, so how does this actually work in practice? Well, one of the first major attempts to really lay this out came from an American economist, Irving Fisher. He kind of saw the economy as a giant machine where money just moves through it in this really predictable, almost mechanical way to get transactions done. And this is his famous equation of exchange. Let's break it down real quick. M is the total money supply. V is for velocity, and that's just a fancy way of saying how fast a single dollar changes hands over, say, a year. P is the average price level of all the goods, and T is just the total number of transactions. So here's the key. The total amount of money being spent on the left side has to equal the total value of all the things being bought on the right side. It has to balance.
And with this example, you can see exactly how a change in the money supply hits prices. Look at that first line. Everything's in balance. But now look what happens if the money supply jumps by 50%, up to 1,500. Now, if we assume that the speed of money, V, and the number of transactions, T, both stay the same, well then the price level, P, is the only thing left that can change. It is literally forced to rise by 50% just to make the math work out again. Now, for Fisher's machine to work so perfectly, it really relies on some big assumptions. First, it assumes the speed of money, V, and the number of transactions, T, are both pretty stable. They don't jump around a lot. And if that's true, it means that M, the money supply, is the real star of the show. Any change in M is what directly causes a change in P. It's a one-way street.
But, not everyone saw the economy as just some simple machine. A group of economists over at Cambridge University, they came up with a totally different way of looking at it, one that focused a lot less on the mechanics and way more on human behavior.
And the contrast between them is really fascinating. Fisher was all about money in motion, as a medium of exchange. But the Cambridge school, they were more interested in money at rest as a store of value. So they asked a much more psychological question. Not how much money is needed for all the transactions, but how much money do people actually want to hold on to?
And this way of thinking led them to the Cambridge equation. Now, it looks pretty similar, but the star variable here is K. And K isn't some mechanical number. It's all about behavior. It represents the proportion of our income that we choose to hold as cash, whether that's for buying coffee or just stashing it away for a rainy day. So, are these two theories completely at odds with each other? Well, it turns out they're not. In fact, Cambridge's K is just the mathematical inverse of Fisher's V. Just think about it for a second. If you decide to hold more of your income as cash, that's a high K. That means there's automatically less money circulating out there in the economy, which means a low V. They're just two different ways of looking at the very same thing, two sides of the same coin. So coming to the same conclusion from two different directions, that seems pretty solid, right? But as with any big economic theory, it didn't take long for the critics to show up and start asking some really, really tough questions. The basic idea that more money leads to higher prices, that part felt right to a lot of people. But was the connection really that direct, that mechanical? Could the real world, with all its messiness, really be this straightforward? Well, according to some very influential thinkers, the answer to that was a huge no.
And the most famous critic of all was John Maynard Keynes. He argued that velocity, V, isn't constant at all. He said it's driven by pure psychology. When people feel optimistic, they spend freely, and V speeds up. But when they're scared, they hoard cash, and V slows to a crawl. He also pointed out that this whole theory just completely ignores interest rates, which are a huge factor in whether you hold money or invest it. Plus, it just assumes the economy is always at full employment, which we definitely know isn't always true.
See, for Keynes, pumping more money into the economy wasn't like watching water rise evenly in a bathtub. No, it was a way more complicated process. New money comes in through very specific channels, and it can distort some prices way more than others, creating all sorts of imbalances. The economy isn't a simple machine, it's a dynamic and often very messy ecosystem. So, was the quantity theory of money just dead? Well, not quite. This intense debate didn't actually destroy the theory, it forced it to evolve into something more sophisticated, something that continues to influence economic policy to this very day. And that evolution led to something called monetarism, a school of thought that's most famously championed by the economist Milton Friedman. Monetarists basically took the core ideas of the original quantity theory and adapted them to better fit the complexities of the real world. So, the monetarist view is essentially a compromise. They looked at Keynes' arguments and said, okay, you're right, velocity isn't perfectly constant, but they argued it is stable and predictable enough over the long run. They believed that its changes could be anticipated, which would allow central banks to still manage inflation by carefully controlling the money supply. So, what should we take away from all this? First, the basic idea still holds up. The money supply is a huge driver of long-term inflation. Second, how fast money moves versus how much we hold on to, that's just two sides of the same behavioral coin. Third, the real world is messy. Things like interest rates and public confidence really complicate the simple theory. And finally, and this is so important, this isn't just some dusty old history lesson. This debate is still shaping how central banks manage our economy right now, today. And that leaves us with one last really big question. If the connection between money and inflation is one of the oldest ideas in economics, why is it still so incredibly difficult for countries to get it right? What are all the unpredictable human factors and global shocks that keep getting in the way? Now that is something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.